Thank you again for joining Square One Engineering Lunch and Learn series. I am your host, Z Rong, Senior Project Manager at Square One Engineering. Today, we have the founder and principal of MEPSCo LLC. He comes to us with 23 years of experience in the medical device manufacturing industry. Reza is an expert in complex manufacturing automations and GMP compliance. Today, he's bringing the same expertise to us. Now I'd like to turn this over to Reza.
Well, thank you very much, Z, and I appreciate Square One for this opportunity. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the session. We're going to be talking about, of course, going from semi-automation, full automation. Just like any other engineering thing that you do, you should always have a definition in place. So let's just define what semi-automation is. Semi-automation is a system that combines human labor with automated machinery to produce goods. Well, there are disadvantages and advantages. So what's an advantage of a semi-automation is there's greater flexibility, right? Because there's human involvement. Something goes wrong, you can always adapt. The disadvantage, however, is it's susceptible to human error, right? And then there's some possible concerns there. It's like possibly larger space needs and maybe dual expenditure because maybe eventually you're going to go to full automation. And so, however, on the full automation side, human workers are involved in the setup, cleanup, and maintenance of the machine, but they're not involved in the operation of the system as the parts are being built. Well, the advantages are obviously speed and efficiency. The disadvantages, however, would be it's a more expensive solution to implement and it's less flexible, right? Something you want to change along the way. The machine is what the machine is, which basically takes you back to how you actually ordered the machine in your user requirement documentation. Well, the concerns here is it low throughput versus high throughput? And that's a mature procurement process, right? Now, this picture over here that you see is a penetrable cap that I have worked on ever since I worked for my past employer. And you can actually go to the website, and Z will put that in the follow-up emails. We can actually see the case study as to say the product came to engineering with it took almost 10 seconds to build a part. Well, if it takes 10 seconds to build a part, is that really a high throughput loop? Can you actually automate that process to where you can make tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of parts? So we'll be talking about that as I go along. I'm going to go back and refer to this product. So just kind of keep that in mind. And again, like any other engineering type conversation, there are key assumptions in here. So the objective here is to assess the manual process and then to find out, do we want to go to semi-automated or do we just go to fully automated manufacturing options? Well, here are the assumptions. So the product is GMP regulated and all solutions will require full validation. The product has cleared FDA requirements, so manual process has supported the current sales volume and market response has been positive. So we know it's a product that we're going to have to produce. Now it comes the forecast portion of it, which, God bless them. Sometimes they hit it just on, sometimes they miss it by a lot, but we're going to say we're going to go ahead and trust the forecast numbers, and we're seeing the demand is going to increase. So the manual production, even at 3 shifts, is not going to sustain long-term production. So the market indicators suggest that continued growth will be there. So forecast is considered reliable and for planning purposes. So by the way, anytime you guys want to stop and send a question to Z, I'm sure she'll let me know. So there are a few questions that needs to be answered in order for you to move into that process. The first one that always kind of trumps, it's a trump card for, do we go to more than our manual setup or not? First of all is quality and safety considerations, both for the for the operator, of course. You don't want to be hurting operators. And then next is, of course, the product quality. So the assessment of the reported injuries and the quality issues on the manual line is very important. So you understand where those injuries might be or where the safety concerns on the product side or the operator side might be. And those are going to be the primary drivers for the automation. The next question would be, so can the identified issues be mitigated with the semi-automation process? Because if you can't do that, then kind of puts the pointer really towards full automation, because you want to get rid of safety concerns, whatever they may be, especially quality concerns. So the next item is production capacity and timeline. Well, the required timeline to meet the forecast production quantities are, hopefully your forecast people are hitting it right, the product going through. But when you look at your production capacity on the manual line, let's just say at 3 shifts, it extends your timeline by approximately 12 to 15 months. And that's usually a good amount of time to either go with semi-auto or fully auto. So what are the risks here? So the manual process may align with forecast or market demand timelines. Automation will reduce the lead time and increase your throughput. So those are the items that need to be matched up with the forecast that's coming from your salespeople. So the next question is, well, do we really understand the process and technical limitations? So on the manual side, the manual process, a human hand can take it, move it around, look inside holes and this and that. Well, the inspection schemes, currently are manageable, and the product quality shows minimal complaints, let's just say. However, once you go into semi-automated and you're using automated inspection and manufacturing techniques, now you need to figure out where the gaps are. So the existing specifications require maybe deeper understanding for the automated inspection. And certain manufacturing steps will need to be modified to redesign for automation. Going back to the caps, if you will, when the R&D group handed over that product and they said, well, it's going to take 3.5 seconds per weld. Oh, you look at it, okay, well, how are you inspecting it? Well, a human might be looking at it and go, oh, I can see that it's an unwelded part. Well, how's the machine going to understand that? But once we go to provide the inspection criteria to the vision system, we need to be able to define what, let's just say, unwelded is. So there's a lot of studies that would go along with figuring out what those things are. And so part of that whole going from manual to automation is to really understand where those gaps are. How can you define them so that you can transfer that information over to the automation vendor so that they can properly quote the job, so that there are no change orders and unforeseen changes for the future. So and then you have to take a look at, say, maybe I need to just change my manufacturing process to, let's say, going from a band heater to maybe induction heater to speed things up. So all of those things are going to have to be looked at. You have to do the testing, studying, all that stuff to put it all together so that you can actually define your process. Either you're going to go to semi-automation or fully automated, that you can actually get that information over to your automation vendor. So the automation readiness really depends on the process maturity. So do you know everything you need to know about your product? Let's say it's a fill volume. Let's say you're putting magnetic particles in there. Well, what is the mag particles? How much of this is that? How much of that? So those are all the questions that is going to have to be studied in figuring out what it is you actually have and what it is you're doing. And next step is, the finance people, right? The money question. So the budget, ROI, which is return on investment, and resource considerations. Well, it's where the management wants to know this information. So cost considerations must include, obviously, the equipment cost. How much is this going to be? So get a budgetary quote so that your management can actually make sure that they have the budget budget for whatever year. Maybe it's next year's budget. What are the facility modifications? So if you go to semi-automated, obviously you're going to have space concerns because it's going to take up more space than automation maybe. Do you have enough room to have semi-automation and then bring in automation to get rid of the other one? So those are your concerns. Could be in building A, building B, who knows? And then do you have the personnel resources on the engineering side? Do you have only junior engineers? Do you have senior engineers? Have they ever done any procurement activities? Do they understand GAMP5? Can you go through it without having issues in the future? Do you have the operations people that can handle the increased throughput and all the paperwork, documentation, everything? Remember, this is going to be validated system. So you're not just going to be building a piece of equipment and bring it in. There's whole, quality concerns that are going to be, do you have the quality people to really support this whole process? Of course, validation, the validation group, documentation, going through the validation process. Do you have those people in place, or are you going to have to hire them, bring them on in the whole life cycle of your process? Of course, anytime you go from one process to the next, you have to maybe do a regulatory assessment. You might have to give that, and that's going to add some time to your release, right? To the release of the product. And then going into the planning, the planning group that, there's going to have to be more parts coming in, more parts going out. Do you have the warehouse space? At my old company, there was no warehouse where we were, so they had to actually go almost all the way down the border for increased warehouse space. So that's huge cost, concerns that are attached to full automation. So then you go into the ROI evaluation. Each company has its own ROI calculations, how much they want return on their investment, what have you. So, what's the production forecast? How does that go back to the calculations of ROI? What's the revenue expectations? Those are all, of course, your finance people working with management. And then on the engineering side, that your job, our job as from the engineering side is to provide throughputs and costs and that kind of stuff to them so they can make the right decisions. The final question is, does the company even have the access to the capital for either automation plans now and across the equipment life cycle, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to is they have to be able to afford the automation, whether it's semi. If you can't afford the automation, then you're going to have to go to maybe semi-automation because it's going to be a less expensive solution for now until you get the money later. Good automated manufacturing practices. So GMP is good manufacturing practices, which tells the company how to document the production of the part. Good automated manufacturing practices is really the process of documenting. It's a fantastic question, by the way, is to document the complete process, going from your requirement stage, writing the user requirement documents, to get the quotes, to go through the functional requirement documents and then functional design documents, moving all the way into FAT, SAT, and then the validation activities. Well, that's obviously it's a management question when they look at the forecast and they say, hey, we cannot. I mean, if you're making only a 1,000 parts per shift, and then you can go maybe to 5,000, but they really want hundreds of thousands, and then you can do the calculations and find out. So somewhere along the line, once the forecast comes out, as I had few slides back, those are the numbers that has to be calculated, knowing what the forecast is going to be, and including all my assumptions that I had included. So, of course, the product is different. It could be a big, giant piece of product where you're making, let's say, 10 a day or 100 a day, that suffices. But if you're going into, let's say, hundreds of thousands, because it's a small part and it's a bread and butter product of yours, just like those caps were, and they still are, um, you know, that's where really kind of the question comes in, is to say, go to the manufacturing folks on the operations, on the operation floor and say, or can you meet your more forecast? Usually they come to manufacturing engineering and they say, hey, we just looked at our numbers. We cannot meet our requirements. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the first questions you need to answer is safety and quality. Now, safety, there is safety of the operator, and then there's safety of the product itself, which also translates into quality, right? Now, those are the number one drivers for going from manual to automation. Because, I mean, have you ever seen, you know, people who fill vials like in pharmaceuticals? I mean, if you see, I went to one of my clients, and on their video screen, they showed this guy holding onto a vial of clear liquid, a little bit milky, and they're looking at it, turning it upside down, inside out to look for a little speck. Well, can you imagine doing that like 8 hours a day? Like that's what you're going to do, is you're going to wake up and go to work and grab a vial, like 10,000 vials, then that's what you're going to, that's what your paycheck is based upon. And there is no such thing as a 100% human inspection, even though they say that that's the case, but no quality person will ever agree that 100% inspection with a human eye is considered 100% inspection. So you're going to miss something. So in order to do that, you're going to take a look and say, well, we missed a couple of things. We missed it. Now what happens is that product is out in the market with a spec in it, right? Well, is that a quality issue? Well, probably, because you're inspecting for it. And so when you go into automation to say, okay, I need to replace this because frankly, after 2 hours of looking at that stuff, your eyes are going to be all over the place. There's no way to sustain that kind of thing. So they're going to go into automation. Well, once you go into automation, all those other things will come into play. All those other concerns is that what is the spec, you know, what is the right quality concern? So the quality, in that case, the quality of that product is a concern, not to mention, you know, the operator is probably going to need new glasses here pretty soon. If not, they're going to have to go with, magnifying stuff. Well, on those caps, in order for them to verify that there is no weld, the operator was squeezing the cap on top to see that if there was a little bulge, because that's unwelded situation. Well, we ended up, having some carpal tunnel issues, right? And the carpal tunnel is just something that just, it doesn't go away easily. So, once I went to automation, right, we took that same process and actually automated that particular inspection process by actually squeezing the cap and looking at it with a camera and twisting it and being able to look to see if there was a bulge there. So that's a perfect translation of what the operator was doing, moved it over to automation. So obviously the operator doesn't get to do that anymore, even though, they don't even have to take samples anymore because the machine does it for them. Uh, on the quality side, if you have an unwelded section, of course, well, your product is going to leak. There's in that same cap on the bottom, if you look, there's a foil. So the top foil is a dust cover, if you will. The bottom foil is a leak cover. And so we had to do many tests, come up with several different tests, vacuum decay, burst pressures, all this stuff to make sure that the product is working the way it's supposed to. Otherwise, the liquid goes right into there, and then now you have contamination. So, yeah, I mean, quality concerns is a huge portion, because the other one, it wasn't giving us what we needed. First of all, it was taking way too long. And then by going into an induction weld, we were able to speed up from a 3.5 seconds down to, I think, 0.4 seconds or something like that. And so that hugely increased our throughput. And that's how they went from, 1,000 parts per shift with 6 people, they went to 5,000 parts per shift with the same number of people, because they're all doing the same thing. We were able to cut a material, we have to cut, there's a pile of material in between the cap, in between those two foils. At first they were cutting them by blades, by hand. I mean, it was horrible. Well, we came up with a semi-automated piece of equipment that basically cut the material and rolled it and shoved it into the cap. And that got away from people having to handle blades. If the part was not exactly the right size that it needed to be and all that other business. So, yeah, I mean, all those things come into play as you are moving forward because you got to go into manual production, right? Especially for the product that comes out of square one, you guys are designing it for your customer, but you're not in the business of manufacturing. You're going to say, here is the part. We can manufacture tens or maybe 20s, hundreds, but then you want to go into, automation because your customer hopefully now as a product, they want to go into automation. More than likely, immediately, they're not going to go into high throughput. So they're going to have to set up some kind of a manual process. And inside that manual process, they are going to find out things that you guys might have never noticed, right? Because of the way the product is handled, different operators will handle them differently than your engineers might. So all of those things will become part of the solution, which the solution that I talk about is going after finding out where each one of the items which one of the items are there that needs to have more attention paid to so that you can put the whole picture together and build the automation around your findings so that the least amount of things you can find out when you paid for the machine at the time of your URS, right? If your URS was missing line items, if you will, each one of those missing line items will end up as a cost it's going to be a change order, and those are never good conversations to be had with management. Well, the formula is the ROI, right? Which what I mentioned earlier is, the company at the beginning, funny enough, when I was working, it used to be called GenPro, and I would go to management and say, so what ROI are we supposed to be using? And it was a kind of a nebulous question. I mean, nebulous answers to, well, depends on who you talk to, because this one building has a higher, ROI calculation than this one over here. So the ROI has to be related to the forecast, right? And once you have the forecast, hopefully it's a solid number that you can actually count on. And then, you go back and say, okay, I can make this much with manual labor. And of course, if you have 6 operators at 3 shifts, right? That's a lot of labor hours that you have to pay for versus the automation. The question is, if I pay for a high throughput automation, which means it's going to be more money, will I make that money back in the allotted time that the company allows? So if you have a 3-year payback, but you go with a higher throughput machine and it's going to show a 5-year payback, well, maybe you stay with the lower throughput so that your cost is lower and you bring it down to your 3-year payback. That depends on the company, right? And that depends on what their what their ROI calculations are. Really, that's what it comes down to. One of the things that is a interesting thing, and I know this one company that basically blew up and couldn't make it because they brought the machine building in-house. Well, the question is, sometimes what happens is you have a couple of engineers and then they work on the manual line. Next thing you know, hey, we could automate this thing, which is what I did. We could automate this portion. So you automate that portion, you automate that portion. Next thing you know, hey, we need automation, low throughput automation, high throughput, whatever. But then what happens is the company thinks, okay, we're just going to build our own equipment. I have never seen that work out very well because they're not machine builders, right? Your job is to manufacture the part, design, it's your design for your product. But your job is not to build equipment. Your job is to build your product and sell your product and move on. Let professionals do what professionals do, and you do what you do. And it's just kind of like it's kind of like changing your oil. Just because you can change the oil in your car doesn't mean that you should go underneath your car and open up, nuts and bolts and get oil all over the place. Just pay people that are doing that for a living. And so someone like me, I've done it for over 24 years now. Um, but I don't build equipment. I don't necessarily build equipment. I manage the project because I understand what the operator wants. I understand that because I've been part of that whole world. So I've worked with the operators, the mechanics, the engineers, the managers, all that stuff. And my job is to really pull that information from them so that I can write the right document, the user requirement document, and move it into go and ask for the automation. So do I go with high throughput versus low throughput? Well, that's what we're going to find out along the way when we're in the inquiry stage, which is like a customer requirement document where you're collecting the data from the people. Now, in a manufacturing environment, engineer's job is to deliver the equipment. Well, who's the customer? The manufacturing folks, right? The manufacturing folks are the customers. And so the engineer's job is to really pull that information from the customer to find out what it is they want. And sometimes they might be asking for more than really they should be, because you could be asking questions like, well, why do you think you need 100 parts a minute when forecast shows for the next 5 years you only need 50 parts a minute, right? And that's how I mean, I had someone else designed a machine that built this part that was 4 times more than the company ever needed. And so when it became time to, the project got transferred to me and the budget had to be cut by half. My question was, why do we have all this automation around the machine when we need to cut this thing by almost, 75%? And so that was the right question to ask, because what happened is the operator can go ahead and put the part in the machine. We didn't have to have all of this other automation to put the part into the machine and take the part out of the machine. And that cut out like almost 50% of the cost of the machine. And so that's our job. That's the engineer's job, to figure out what it is that the customer wants, build the correct document, go get the correct quote from the right company, deliver the solution, and then release it to manufacturing. Well, if you pay for a carpal tunnel, if you pay for a operator's injury, um, that's going to be the ROI kind of happens very quickly. So those are the questions you need to ask: is, are you hurting your people? Is there a liability there? I mean, is there a liability for hurting your people? Because after a while, people just quit. They just don't want to do that anymore. And next thing you know, you're not building a product. That's one thing. You're not going to have a product to sell. But on the quality side, if you put out a bad product because you missed the inspection, the operator couldn't inspect for what it is you need to inspect for, then now you just put out a bad piece of product. And once you get the complaints coming back, if there's an FDA issue, you're going to get your observations, and then now you have to deal with it. So I mean, those are all parts of the questions that needs to be asked, and questions that needs to be answered properly.